I'd say it out loud, viewers. We got a show for you tonight, and this is going to be a personal show. Cassie's going to share some experiences about her dad. He recently passed away, and this is really the first time me and Cassie have talked about this. So this will all be new to me as well. So let's get right to it, Cassie. How are you doing this evening?
Just have to say, I'm so grateful to you. It takes a certain type of friend to sit through someone else's, grief, particularly right after that. I can't promise that I'm not going to cry, but I also have done a lot of laughing and I can bounce back. And so I just appreciate you being willing to, potentially be in those moments with me and like find out a little bit about my dad. So
In my personal experience, losing my dad was it was the hardest thing. Now, I have not lost a kid. I have 4 kids, and none of my kids have had any problems, but I was only 26 years old when my dad died.
gosh,
And
no, I
yeah,
can't imagine losing it. That's
yeah. Well,
young.
then, hey, the good news is 9 months later, my mom died. Now, the difference was my dad died of a sudden heart attack, but my mom had a long 2-year bout with cancer. So I understand what it's like to not say goodbye to a parent, and then I know what it's like to say a long goodbye. So I don't know how
That.
your situation was, but tell us a little bit about your dad. Was this sudden, or was this something that just sort of was lingering on?
So I like thank you for sharing that. I didn't know that that's not something we had gotten to before in our friendship, but um I'm sorry to hear that. So I feel like my dad was both. So he was an alcoholic and so had been through many stints of rehab in his life. And just briefly, his most recent one before I start, I really got, what I needed from my dad and had him back recently, before he relapsed. And so that was really good. But so it was sudden in the sense that we were not expecting him to pass away, but also chronic in the sense that he had been very ill before, near death many times, where he had gone back to rehab. And this time was a time that, he's more elderly and frail and more stubborn, quite frankly. And
Oh,
so,
so yeah, because we were supposed to record Thursday morning, and that's when you got the call, right?
yeah, I mean, I forgot what day it was. And so part of what we're going to talk about is my shock. And I was even confused later in the night why you texted me about or that you needed to move our time back, because it didn't register me. And so I forgot that. I forgot another meeting with one of my friends I was supposed to meet. It was, yes. So
It does set you back. It's like you just sort of, there's those 5 stages of grief, and the disbelief is usually, one of the first stages that you have. It's like, I can't believe this is happening. I just don't,
yeah.
you know.
In saying that, though, you made the short list because I did text you without remembering. We even had a recording to tell you about my dad, right? So
Well, yeah, I feel like I'm moving up in the world, so that's thank you for that.
yeah.
And like I said, Cassie, another thing is I've done about 15 funerals for people, and my dad died early, so when I had a friend that his dad, they would call me to do the eulogy or the funeral, or
Really?
yeah, and so there's some good things that can come out of that, but to talk about death for because what it is, it's the death aware. I call a funeral is Death Awareness Day. You know,
Yo, that's it. I like that. I'm already so tickled that you have all these experiences and I had no idea. Like this is
well,
all.
and we're in this together. I mean, you said thank you for. Yeah, it's not a I've been there, done that. And
Right.
it's just tough. And those first days, everybody's saying I'm sorry and all that. But 2 weeks later, I think 2 weeks later is when it really hits you, when the casseroles quit coming and the
Oh,
people quit
yeah.
saying that. And then it's like
And
you're sitting there by yourself going, I want to call my dad. Oh,
sure.
I can't, I have to call this way. There's not going to be a cell
Yeah,
phone
yeah,
number.
yeah. I think that's
So
really a powerful point, and I feel very lucky because of my professional training and also, practicing with patients that I do know all about what you're saying. And it becomes almost a situation where what it can feel like, right, to the survivors is that, everything goes back to normal. And for you, it's very much not, you're, um, the emotional lability, right, is still there for you, and it's not for other people, and it's not because they don't care. It takes a lot. it takes time to get back to that state. I know that. I'm happy to know that, because then I can kind of talk myself through, because I get very anxious about like, okay, this is normal. Or, you know, when does this get abnormal? Right. I mean, I've had some experiences that I have heard people that are grieving have had, or patients have had or said, and now I've experienced them. And I'm like, oh, okay. You know, I have a much deeper understanding for the idea of shock. And yeah, so we'll get into
So,
that.
let's get to I'm going to get to the funny story you're talking about, and then I wanted to get to the question about death in itself, and I ask you a couple of
Sure.
questions about what you think about that. But let's tell me a couple of funny stories. You sent me a couple pictures and things, but how would you like your dad to be remembered?
So let me just speak so that I did put stuff in writing just so that I can make sure that I a little bit stay on track because of the subject matter. So let me pull that up. Okay. My dad's favorite story to tell me was this. And so we don't even comment on this. And I'm not even going to comment on this. We know historically in almost every culture, men or people identify that identify as male, historically, like I said, all around the world, when they have children that are labeled male at birth, there is a certain kind of pride in whatever. In many cultures, including American culture, having a boy. So for a lot of people, right? We don't have to talk. Honestly, I don't even want to get into it. The point of my story is this. My dad was the opposite. And you're like, oh, that's so cute, right? Like he wanted a girl. No, he didn't just want a girl. He also wanted a girl because it was a competitive thing, because for decades there were no girls on this side of my dad's family. And males determine the biological, I'm going to use these terms, biological sex at birth, right? So all women's eggs are X's, and then the sperm can be XY, right? So that's going to determine. And all boys. And so, yes, did he try to make it about me personally? But he didn't really know me yet. But yeah, he also worked in that hospital when I was born. And so he wore a pink shirt. My mom had given over to the fact it would be a boy, right? I mean, his brother had already had my cousin who was a boy. It was just like continue. I mean, my grandmother had like 13 brothers. I mean, it was ridiculous, all boys. And so my dad wore a pink shirt the day I was born. And because he worked in the hospital, he would have been arrested now because of those little alarms on the feet. But he took me all around the hospital and was like, show me, like, I have a daughter. And nobody knew that background. He was just like so excited. So I always loved hearing that story. That was one of the sweeter stories. There was also a lot of childhood trauma, and that was not in the way you would think based on like him being an alcoholic. This was based on him being a very brilliant veterinarian and me being a very curious child.
No.
So, I know, right?
I cannot believe that you were not into some kind of mischief at all times.
I think at like age 4 or 5, he talked to me. When he talked to me, he talked to me like an adult. I mean, not like he would talk to someone he was in vet school with or whatever. But he said to me one time, he's like, listen, all kinds of things go through these tunnels in your body to get different places. And that's how your body runs. And I remember that. And I'm like, tunnels in the body. And so I was kind of locked in. And so when my dad had talked with me about what happened, a skinned knee, how it healed, a headache, like anything, he would break it down all the way into like the pathophysiology of what the body did. And I was all the way locked in. That's cool. Except when you're, 7 and he's in vet school at Kansas State. And for example, there's a horse in distress with twins, and he wakes you in the middle of the night. He's like, Cass, do you want to come see some twins be delivered? And I'm like, he's like, horses. I'm like, oh my gosh, right? I'm like 7, I'm like, or 8. I'm like, these are horses, and be twin baby horses. Yay. I'll never forget. I go in there. I am like witness. I'm just like, my dad's in there with 2 grown men, like pulling the legs of horses out of this, because it was in distress. They're like, one's gonna, and I'm just like, this is okay. You know what I mean? So early memories like that. There was also a cow that they were doing a C-section on that was like fully alive and awake, standing up and just getting cut, and this will come back when I tell you about what happened at my shock during his death. All of these like cut open I mean, it sounds really gruesome right now, but just wait for it. So I saw that. he got a call from a neighbor when a dog had got hit by a car, and we like rushed over there. And I'm like, oh my God, it's an emergency. Yes, I want to be involved in all of it, you know? And then the dog, he was like, just watch it. We have to be real gentle on the transport. We're going to take it back to the clinic. You just sit in the back with it. And the dog expired in front of me. And I literally watched the eyes and I just was like, you know what I mean? So like, I'll never forget, pulled the car over. I mean, checked the dog had died. It like had, right. And so we just sat on the side. And he's like, just, sometimes you lose them. Looking back, I'm like, do you lose them like with the 9-year-old? Like, cause that, you know what I mean? I don't know. To me, that's very funny, and probably not at all, because I'm talking. It didn't truly traumatize me. It really motivated me to do and be interested in medicine, right? And in learning about that. So sorry, I'll go on and on. You got to stop me if I do that.
Well, that's okay. We want to hear the stories about, how you grew up with your dad. I mean, that's the things that you remember hanging around your dad. I went everywhere with my dad, every
Did
single
you?
where we go, fishing and whatever. I got a picture of me holding up a crawdad and my dad holding up a 20-pound muskie in a picture. And so I still remember this. I was probably 6 or 7. Yeah, I would add a fish head and I would catch the crawdads by the thing, and so
Oh,
I actually was holding one up by the whisker or whatever, and he's got this big muskie. I got this crawdad. I'm sitting there with my pants crooked, this little kid, and
oh my God. How
those
old?
are fun times that you remember. And
Yeah, yeah. I'm trying to think of here. Let me look at other things that I might have written. So his first year in St. Kitts, so he went to veterinary school. So he would always say, and he like thought this was so great, as this proud, he was very proud of the fact that he got into vet school, it's a huge accomplishment. He made sure everyone knew that, first of all, veterinarians, it's harder to get into vet school than medical school, surely because of the number of veterinary schools. And number two, they are just as talented. I mean, he didn't say it, but they are basically pediatricians for young children, or NICU, or baby doctors, because their patients can't talk to them, right? So they're basing it all on the patients in the lab. Like, my dad was a brilliant diagnostician. He loved that. He, just like I said, he would love to get a problem or, a clinical situation, and he was very good at figuring things out. And so that was a lot of what I experienced. I got to see a lot of surgeries, and he would walk me through that. And I know that may not be exciting to people, but I was the child that was into that. Like, my brother's an attorney now. So like he was like, now Brock and him had a big relationship with their athletic ability, because they both played baseball. They were both quarterbacks. My dad was a quarterback on his high school team, and Brock was at Carmel. And so they had a totally different, my dad was like, yay, swimming. Truly, he could hardly watch my races because he would get so nervous for me, but he didn't come like my mom consistently to these meets. So he was very proud of me in that way, but we had a totally different relationship, whereas I just got to see a lot of really cool stuff, and also experience, other trauma. St. Kitts, he was first year vet school. So just like first year medical school, you're learning and dissecting, right? You have to learn the anatomy. So it's, human bodies, but for him, he'd be like, come on with me, and walk into these big ass freezers with horse heads and like things all good. He's just like, totally normal. He kind of normalized it for me, but I'm being silly, but no, it was at the time like, I don't think back and have nightmares about this, but truly, we also had to listen to this. We had a donkey. So we lived for 3 months. I was homeschooled because we went there to visit. He was there for a year, and there was this compound, and it was surrounded by a big, like, concrete fence, but it was for the vet students. There were like 4 houses. None of them had doors. None of them had windows. Scorpions. My dad's like, okay, kids, get in bed. It's time for bed. Put the net down and like start spraying around. I look back on this now. I'm like, I don't know if this is, and then so no doors. We had no doors. It's so warm. And so we had a pet donkey. His name was Jason. I'll send you pictures. Brock rode him. And so Jason would just wander whenever whoever like got up first and started making breakfast into the homes. And so I would wake up and come out, and there would be literally, Jason would be standing here, and here's like my mom. It was very unique experiences as a child.
so now, is your brother older or younger than you?
He's younger by like
Okay.
almost 3 years.
Almost 3 years. Okay. Okay. So, we've talked about some fun stories about your dad and memories and all that. Now, I want to ask you questions about,
Sure.
like death, because I mean, we have all sorts of people believe in death. I mean, I would say one thing, like, let's just say maybe when you die, you go to heaven or wherever you go to this other place. And guess what? Maybe you can come back, but it's so good that you don't come back.
Mm.
I mean, I
This
don't
is
know. There's
I'm
so
desperate to believe in that. I'm desperate to believe in heaven. I'm desperate to believe that there's an afterlife. I mean, I think that's why. And so I'm so excited that you brought that up. Like, I feel like almost this was meant to be how you redirected this, because in my dad's, which was basically a lot of 2022, was the last time my dad was my dad, like sober, right? Um, he became very into this church. He could not drive because of him getting arrested previously for drunk driving, and he was on probation, and so I was taking him to Lebanon to go through probation and do these drug screens, doing great. Um, but he had a church where he lived in his apartment downtown of like 4 blocks, and he got really engaged in that. And not just engaged, he got engaged and he had men to his apartment and youth groups. He really dug in weekly. He was really into talking about the Bible with me, and I let him, right? Like, in many ways, he really, I'm glad that that was a gift that he gave me, that he showed me that someone as skeptical as him, or as into science and what we can see in facts as he was, um,
so what you're saying is
really
he was
immense,
very skeptical. He was very skeptical about,
like I,
about
right.
faith and that. And then he was working with this group. Now, so did he distance himself from the group at some point, or?
Yeah,
uh,
he did. I mean, he pulled back, and I don't want to get into it, but everyone that knew my dad and did know my dad up until his death, including my family, really exhausted all of the things that we could, and including the law enforcement in his area, including the hospitals that he was being admitted to. So, just there's a lot of people to thank, because I'm just grateful that he was housed when he passed away, right? And that would not have been possible. My family certainly has the resources to make sure that my dad would be housed, right? But in terms of what I know to be true about his particular situation, and how many times we had tried, and also how we were currently or had been affected in the past, and we have a new baby. My brother had a new baby. You know, um, I don't know what I was going to say about that. I felt a real great sense that I had to tell people, like, it was hard for me to explain that he could have family like us that had resources, and like he would have to die the way he did. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does make perfectly sense. And I do addiction counseling, and I've had very similar situations where I'm counseling somebody and they pull back, and then the next thing you know,
Mhm.
they're not here.
And
Because as long as they were in contact with you, that
and
things were
so
okay.
I know that as a mental health professional, and I'll tell you where that piece comes in. Thank you for saying that. I You're just brilliant. um, No, truly, because he had pulled back from me in the last, like, month and a half, and I honestly, I'm gonna tell you the truth, I thought, and I didn't even ask my mom and my brother. I did not even ask them, but I thought that they had been like, "You have to stop with Cassie." Like, that you have, because of how I had been expressing, how I was feeling, right? So, I did not ask them, because I didn't, want to know that they had felt like they had to, like, take care of me. I didn't want to hear that. I had really assumed, because it went from, to just a kind of nothing. And so that was my bad, but it wasn't like, there's no way that I would have been able, and
Yeah,
what.
and I see you trying to cast a little blame on yourself here. And what I can tell you is that what I've experienced with folks is at some point, I think most addicts think I can quit anytime. I
Mm,
can quit anytime. And then when they go through rehab several times, like it sounds like your dad did, at some point they get so disgusted or so disappointed in themselves that they know they can't quit. And when they get to that point of the no hope thing, it doesn't matter who's trying to save him. I mean, it just sometimes it sounds like he didn't have his license, he didn't have his freedom, his things to look forward, his purpose. And at some point, it just gets you down so much that hey, I've done what I can. It's time. I'm done. And
Yeah, and I think that a lot, and like part of what precipitated it too was like the birth, and I'm going to talk through this, the birth of my nephew, my brother Brock Miles, this precious baby, where for very good reason, and it was me, and I was very strict with Brock about like he needed to be able to have this newborn period, and like there is not one thing that can be said to you that like I was really protective of that, to the point where I said I called off him meeting Miles. I called it off. And so what I'm concerned about, which I mean, we've talked about, so Brock and I are fine, but I want him to know that I called that off of my dad not meeting Miles, right? Because they wouldn't have wanted pictures with my dad that way. They wouldn't have wanted Miles to have to like meet my dad that way. Like it was my dad. And so, but that's really tough for my brother because he does have this beautiful new 5-month-old baby, right? And so, but like
in that regard, I think that
Brock's like the best son. He's like the best son. So he did everything that he could in a really sad like role reversal, where he had to be the parent, before he was a real parent,
Yeah, and that's the thing about tragedy, addiction. And I can tell a quick story about my mom. She was addicted to pain pills. But back in the 70s and 80s when it was alcoholics were a thing, and right. She was functioning. We didn't really know what was going on, and she says I'm going to Al-Anon, which is support of somebody. A friend of mine's in Al-Anon. I'm going there. So she told us that. Well, my mom died 9 months later than my dad, and she died of liver cancer. And it was, a lot of it I think was from the drug use. And we found her coins for AA, her 1 year, her 2 year. Oh. And then we started reflecting on it. Yeah. I remember when mom was finally, because she wanted us to quit everything. I mean, she wanted me to quit caffeine and all that. And so she died in 1989. And I, in memory of her, I've not had a cup of coffee since 1989 because he was just like.
I mean, I'm telling you, nicotine and coffee are the two most addictive substances we have in the country, and then alcohol and heroin. So, thank you so much for sharing that. First of all,
but it is, it is one of those things that it doesn't matter. Addiction, it doesn't matter your socioeconomics. Yeah. It doesn't matter who you are, skin, whatever it can.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. It really doesn't. And it doesn't implicate you. I mean, when people are under the influence, they can be awful. And so, that obviously that in a lot of the situations, which I won't go into, that is what we had to go through. But, what I will remember, when you think about the person and how they are morally and ethically and really when you know them, I mean, when I think of my dad, like as a practitioner and watching him, like, his worst days were the euthanasia days, which he set aside as a day because he knew it was going to be a shit day. And I remember being in the clinic or whatever, because I'd watched the surgery, and him just like holding and collapsing with these like grown men who had to like put their pups down, or their dogs of like 15 years, and just crying with them. And then, the like vet techs being like, "Dad, let's go to a room, guy," because my dad's like me. Like he's not, if he feels something, even if it's been around people, he was very like sensitive to suffering. He really didn't like suffering. And so it didn't matter. Like if that person was vulnerable right there, he didn't need to go to a room. You know what I mean? If they were he would go there with them. And I just, because when you lose a pet, I mean, if people don't treat animals like, he took it really hard. And I think a lot of that and kind of how he grew up, he loved going to my mom's house because they were like high school sweethearts, but he loved going to my mom's house because like they were very affectionate physically. were always like very proud of him and told him, because he was a really good athlete, and like celebrated his accomplishments, said I loved you, and touched him and held him and told him all this, which he didn't really necessarily get in his home. And so he felt like I don't know, I think he appreciated that. And I mean, I know he did. And he then was really sensitive to other people that even that he didn't know that, needed that kind of response in the moment.
Now, so your parents were divorced, correct?
They were. And it was because, once Brock and I were older and I went to college, it was because of his substance abuse,
Yeah,
and what I had not mentioned, which I wanted to say, and I really want to say, is that because you shared that, and it wasn't something I wasn't going to share, but I will now because you brought it up. He also, as a veterinarian, got in trouble with the DEA for opiates because he was prescribing. Now, he was an athlete. He was truly in physical pain, right? He had a lot of physical pain, but he also was a great diagnostician and animal doctor, but so he's like one of those proud, like, I'm not going to go to the doctor. Like, I know medicine, I know pharmacology, I know blah, 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 that too. Right. And had access to prescribing. So he got in trouble for, I want you to keep all this in, by the DEA for making up fake dogs and prescribing opiates because he was abusing them. And that was in Zionsville that happened. And so I'm just trying to do all of this because, as sick as it is, because of my advocacy, there will be people that are going to pull his name. I mean, that's what they've done with my uncle, because my uncle played professional, there will, which is yay, but there will be people that pull his name and see that. And so I will talk about that just like you did. And thank you, because opiate abuse and addiction in this country is really, I mean, I hate to say that. I mean, that was the reality, and so I thank you for bringing that up. It wasn't
so
that I,
it sounds like he, pretty much self-medicated his problems, and
yeah.
and I think that's a guy thing. I think that's a guy thing. It's like you said earlier, I don't have to go to the doctor. I can, man up and blah blah blah. But it sounds like also that when somebody had to put their pet down or whatever, he was just very sensitive. So it
So
sounds like to me that really like got to him deep.
totally. I mean, he certainly had trauma from his childhood, and he was super sensitive. There was absolutely personality disorder, mental illness. He was resistant to that. And in his sober state with me, he was super proud of the fact that, like, I had embraced this profession, right? And I was advocating on behalf of it and knew all the, knew he was fascinating. He was very, and then in his addiction, he was very dismissive of it. And it's like all in your head. And like, what are you talking about? I am a doctor. You are dealing with people's feelings. You are soft. You are this, like, very, and in his sober state, he'd be like, it is just fascinating, Cass. Like, all the new research. I looked into it after you said that. And did you see the new MRI brain scans for blah, 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 blah? And that's how we would talk. And so, like, and then he would be on these medications, right? And then go off, right? And so it was a direct link. And Brock, and what was sad is Brock and I thought like we were really onto something, because he was starting to listen to me. My brother's beautiful wife is a child therapist, so was really helpful for all of us in digging into like the child trauma aspect of him, right? It was just all this brilliant, thing. But it's not brilliant in substance abuse. It's just not. There's not a linear, it has a tragic ending more often than not.
Yeah, I agree. It's very tough, and I've had clients that have gotten better, and usually what I try to get people to do is quit everything, nick it, all of it. Just very much like what my mom was trying to do to me. Look, Johnny, you need to, and I'm like 26 years old, and I'm like, I didn't even get a good run at having any addictions or anything. And,
Yeah.
and it's one of those things. Either you're an addict or you're not. I mean, that's the bottom line. And you can be addicted to a lot of different things, but that mindset of the addict is just something that I don't understand. And the people that I counsel with are some of those folks are addicts, and they go and talk to other addicts in a way that I can't. And it's very it's
I mean,
almost like they have their own language.
it's true. It is absolutely true. And I know that language. I mean, I've seen that language in patients, and I've done homeless healthcare, and that is not to try to stigmatize, but I have personally, let me put it, dealt with higher rates of substance abuse in that population than I have in other areas of practice. Remind me what you just said so I can come
Oh,
back to that.
was talking about the
Oh,
addict's mindset.
Yeah, so the mindset, absolutely. And there's a big psychological piece to that. But there is also very much a chemical piece to that. And there is a physiological piece to that. Let me bring it back all the way to my dad, right? And so, yes, I hear you. However, for example, lots of people smoke. I'm just going to use THC because it's a good example of a difference. And that's it. Let's not put anything else on it. And the reason it's being legalized, right, is that when people, for example, withdraw from THC, don't have it. They're chronic smokers, and then all of a sudden, like, they stop, right? Like, you will not die. You will be shitty. You will be very annoyed, right? But you will not die. And so this is what I'm talking about. The tissues, right, in your body, right? The brain, the chemistry that is changed and manipulated in your body when you take that substance versus nicotine versus alcohol versus opiates is very different physiologically. Because, like I said, when people don't take those, they get very ill. First of all, alcohol, if you do know, nobody who is an alcoholic or drinks every day right now, or however much you drink, please research how to slow down. Don't ever stop, to the point where I will actually, and I'm not going to disclose to who, bought alcohol for alcoholics on the way to rehab so that people did not have seizures and die, right? You cannot cut that cold turkey. Opiates. This is why opiate addiction is so strong. When I say they feel like they have the flu, it's like the flu times hell, whatever you imagine that to be. Imagine that, and then not wanting, so they're not even using to get any feeling besides just like, I don't want to feel like I'm going to die. You get it? They're not getting high anymore. They're just not. I mean, when they kind of do, then they usually overdose because the body physically can't. Talk about some of the social dilemmas that you've seen, because you have seen, obviously, in counseling these patients, you've heard about that, and that's,
Oh yeah, I had a patient that wasn't too far from your neck of the woods up there. That or client, I don't know, patient client. This person was on the most pain. He had the patches. I actually went to a couple of his doctor's appointments, and he would literally drink a case of beer every day with it on top of it.
Yeah.
He passed away. It's, sounds very similar to what your father's experience was.
Yeah, I mean, he was not on opiates when he passed away, only because he didn't have access. But you cannot, again, combine that kind of stuff. That sounds very similar.
And
see, this is my thing. Were doctors aware of this? Like, did they know he was also drinking? Because at that point, that's a contraindication medically.
You know what? They get a lot of times addicts will get so good at manipulation. They'll tell you this and that, and what can they do? I mean, he was, and it sounds like your dad, from the sports injuries. This guy was a parrot. He jumped out of airplanes and got injured, back injury. So how old was your dad?
72.
72. Okay. That I would have thought maybe a little younger, but than that. So he had you when he was a little older then, correct?
Yeah. He had me when he was 31.
Okay. So that's not, I mean, you were around for a while. One of the things that I think about is, like, I've been alive longer without my dad than I have with my dad. And that's one of those interesting things, but I'm still here. I'm doing all right. So you can survive.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yep.
You had an interesting experience with a coroner/chaplain. Could you tell us about that?
Yes, and I just have to preface all of the situation with, we're going to say that, shock. We'll use the term shock, right? Which is whatever you want to say, trauma, whatever. But I mean, I had to go identify a corpse. I mean, that's the reality of it. Now, my father had not been deceased for more than a day, so we're not getting into any kind of very, awful situations. Nonetheless, I am a crime show junkie. I mean, truly, Michael and I will like fall asleep watching that, or he listens to podcasts. And I know a lot of people are. And the reason I can say that confidently is because my very, very sweet, kind, lovely opposite of me sister-in-law likes crime junkies, specifically the serial killer ones, which I'm into too, because psychopathology really fascinates me because you can't treat it. And so, you know, all of us are trying to figure out, like, but can we, you know what I mean? Because she's, you know, and I'm like, I might, let's. So I have to preface it with that. I also have to preface it with, I made a new friend who, you know, Catherine, who was a former coroner, right?
Yeah.
So we've been talking recently. So this is, I'm primed with this, right? Also, right before, I'm not going to go into it, but because of the situation with Jim Lucas, I had been on the phone with police officers the day before and a half, right? 4 of them. So with all of that being said, I had a lot of intrusive thoughts that I will share, and then you'll understand some of them later shared with the police officer that was there, who was lovely, as it turns out. At first was not, I thought. And the chaplain, who, bless his whole heart, when I showed up, I'm sure he introduced himself as chaplain. Like, I'm positive. Why would he not? The police officer, lovely. She was lovely. Introduced herself too. I flipped into, we're at a homicide scene. Again, I mean, John, it was.
The switch went on.
Oh, I'm not kidding. So, and then I had a moment, you know, I'll talk about that in about 15 minutes after that, where I feel like when my patients like, I snapped out of it, or people talk about snapping out of it. Truly, it was like all of a sudden I just felt calm, and I was like, okay, wow, like, this is not a murder scene, and I'm really sorry. Now, I didn't figure out he was not the coroner for a few minutes later, but still, let me get into it. I showed up and I flipped into that. The minute I saw them, he became the coroner, and because he was plainclothes, I mean, he may have had a cross like one, I have no idea. And she was homicide detective. And so I just am like, I don't even look at the apartment or the door being open. And I just say, okay, all right, so how does this go? How do we do this? Like, get down to business. I said, this is what I say to the chaplain. Do we shake hands? So they're just like, first of all, they're trained in shock, not appropriate behavior. Like, they're not going to reinforce weird behavior. Like, they're both trained in that. I don't remember this as a professional at all. And then I turn and see the deceased body, because the door is open. Bless my father's heart. He had gotten out of the shower. Yes, they covered him for me, and had fallen, you know, we think fallen, and nobody moved him from the floor. Fine. It's a crime scene investigation. Makes sense to me. Okay. Because you don't touch the body. Then I asked them, may I go in? And they're both just staring at me like, and I say, I will not touch anything. I will not. May I touch him? May I touch him? No, I won't touch anything else. And they're both just like, and finally the chaplain / coroner, because he's the coroner the whole time. He goes, I mean, I don't see why not. And so I just rush over to my dad. You know, I go down, you know, I weep. I mean, I'm not, you know, I'm just doing the whole normal things, right? That you wouldn't do if you're not a murderer. Intrusive thoughts. When did they come in? On the drive down. I'm like, this is not a homicide. It's weird. Because I know I'm like, it's weird. Like, what? I just hope that I don't act weird enough that I look like I did actually murder my dad. What?
Yes, it's like,
what?
You've been all over the place.
Now, you know what? Guess what also happened? Carmel police called me. No, they didn't, John. I got a call, no bullshit, from a 317. This is what I thought, 317 number, and I picked up. They did not say Carmel police. What they said was something about a chaplain. They said nothing about police. And then the 317, and so they were like, do you want a chaplain? I'm like, yes, I'm the only one going, because my brother's in South Korea on business. Michael's in New York. My mom's at work. My mom eventually came. Anyway. So I was like, that's very sweet. Also, that they're sending a chaplain from the Carmel Police Department. Does that make sense at all? That's not a service that the police department ever does, but I'm like expecting the chaplain. So that's why I show up. I'm like, well, you're not the chaplain. I got a call. He's coming from Carmel. It's a service.
Oh, so you're like giving this
guy.
guy.
Yeah, I'm like, obviously coroner. Coroners also, Catherine, tell everyone, don't show up on, first of all, really not even homicide scenes unless it's like some kind of really crazy situation. Definitely not on natural deaths. So I also know that to be true. Anyway, I go into my dad's bed. Then they move in, right? They move into his apartment, right? And let me do my thing. Very professional looking back, not to me, because I'm in my head and I'm like, I see marks around his neck. Corner. I need you to tell me what that is. And the pastor is just, the chaplain is just like, Then the female police officer starts answering for him. I'm pissed. I'm pissed because I'm like, first of all, I'm talking to the coroner. Second of all, you're out of your line. You're out of your role now, miss. And it bothers me when women can't be professional because you're making us all look bad. I mean, listen.
You're like going there.
You hear the conversations. We were hysterically laughing. Like, I feel like we're kind of friends. They probably have never had this kind of situation, me either, in the end. But right now, I'm just like, you are, first of all, Miss Homicide. Is this your first day on the job? Where's the tape? There's no tape. I start to examine my dad's head. That's what I do. I start to question why there are marks on his neck that are just like his necklace. There's no strangulation. I look back at them multiple times. Looking at the coroner, he's blank because he's doing the chaplain.
He's a chaplain.
Me. Okay, this is still shock. I'm not going to reinforce this. And I'm looking at him like, of course I got the newbie coroner. Yeah. And the like first day homicide detective. Awesome. This is just, yep, there it is, Dad. This is super funny, except they're messing up all of your crime scene. And so then I start inspecting his head and trying to lift it, except a little bit of rigor mortis is set in. And then I get scared that it's going to crack. And I'm like, did you do this already? Or is this the first time? Then I get up and I'm like, well, I guess I'm going to, may I, I'm looking at her like, no, you should say no. You can't walk through the apartment. You should preserve the evidence, but I'm going to go ahead and ask you. And I'm like, may I keep walking? She's like, yeah. And I do. And I walk through, the table's turned over. I go into the closet. There's a toolbox. I pull out a hammer at one point and examine it and look back at like them, like glaringly, like, you missed this, guys, just like not okay. Okay. Then I snap out of it and I'm like, okay, I still think he's cornered, but I just start apologizing. Listen, this is natural death. You guys told me this, the investigator, or whoever called me and my brother. Absolutely. It's been very clear. I watch a lot of crime shows. I'm kind of embarrassed. I mean, I just have to say, that's why you were answering.
Do you think, let me stop you. Do you think that it was part of the shock and denial? Do you think it was totally denial? Like, hey, this ain't happening like this.
Well, yeah, exactly. That is exactly. I'm like, there is no, I know this is all what was going to, yeah, it was absolute. And I'm telling you, so I want to bring this into it because I was primed. This is where the mind goes. I'm primed with a new friend who's a coroner. I just talked to all these police and I watch crime. I think it's really important for everyone to realize that, like, and I don't even think that I didn't talk to her specifically about it, but she didn't look at all phased when I was like, oh my goodness, I watch crime shows all the time. This is horrible. I am so clearly when you got the call, I'm sure some kind of homicide, someone made sure this was not a homicide before they didn't
even investigated. Yeah. So it's like written off. So was your dad's death because he fell out of the shower, or you don't know? He just like killed over. So
he was malnourished. He had AFib. He was drinking very, very heavily. I mean, he, all of these risk factors. Now, the reason I say that I think he fell out of the shower is because he, to me, which was very comforting, like smelled very clean and like was, had been, that's what, I think anyway.
It's like your mom says, wear clean underwear in case you're in an accident.
His big fear, and I think this was probably because of him being a doctor, was just, and it's weird. He was just like, I don't want to be fat, and I don't, and this was even before he'd say this, he was like, I don't want to be found just like rotting or blah, 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 blah. And so that was really important to him. And I think his dignity too. And so all of that was preserved in terms of how quickly he was found. And then when I got there, like certainly I made, and the people from the mortuary were lovely. So I do want to tell those stories quickly. I don't want to take you much longer, but because I get really into other people's jobs. I mean, everyone was really lovely, but I do want to talk about what the chaplain, once I realized he was a chaplain, and the police officer and I talked about, because it was wild. But I want you to also ask whatever questions you have or tell your stories because I really appreciate your stories.
I mean, it's about you. I've told already more than I probably should have. But
so, I mean, are you going in the capacity of a chaplain? Like, what's your capacity of showing up, or what kind of, or you just have been known to be a good counselor in these situations? Like, how are you going to these people?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm a licensed minister, and what a licensed minister is that you are called to do. I'm not like ordained or anything. I can't go around. But if a church would call me to be their minister, I could go to that specific church. But I just all my stuff stemmed basically. I've done about probably 15 funerals or maybe 20 weddings, just from people that know me, and I, I do an okay job. And one of the things that I do is I make it 110% about the person that I'm either eulogizing or that I'm doing the production, the nuptials for. I mean, I really have a problem when and I'm like you, I analyze other people's jobs. It's like I really have a problem when a preacher or somebody that's doing a service gets up there and talks about me, I do not do that. I probably, like I said, I've done more today with you than I would.
I don't think so. I'm so grateful for all of I mean, I want you, honestly, you can run this flat if you want without any edits, because I don't want it, I mean, obviously some parts you'll want to, if you want, if you don't.
This is going to be one of my least edited shows because.
And so I'll put that, I'm going to note that because I'm asking you, right? Because
I almost said, let's do it live. I think you're really close to being able to go live with things. And
I'm real sketch about that.
You got a couple, and this one's
so nice. You're so encouraging. I really appreciate
it. We're going to get there. I'm going to, it's going to be a few more recordings, but this one was a little bit too sensitive to try to throw you into the live factor. But we're probably halfway there from where we started.
Okay, that's a huge improvement for someone like me, right?
Oh yeah, it's definitely is, and we'll just keep doing some shows, and then eventually live will happen. So you probably have, in closing, maybe you got a couple more stories you might want to tell, and then we'll wrap this thing up.
Yeah, and I do want to wrap it up, and thank you again. They really are just going to be about my imaginary crime scene, which was not a crime scene. Let me just wrap that up, because people are probably like, wow, okay, so were they, okay? When did I discover that the chaplain was a chaplain and not the coroner? This was at the point where I asked for toxicology results. And once again, the female officer answered, and I am just now like, and she says, well, and she's great. She's trying to looking back. She's like, there are not going to be toxicology results because this is not a homicide investigation. This is a natural death investigation. I'm going through the house after I'm like looking at her like, why are you not? And she has said this multiple times. Like, she is not. And then when I come to, she's brilliant. And I'm like, okay, this is what's going on. Then she breaks then she goes into like, okay. And then she starts her face and her whole, like, I'm so sorry for your loss. Like, you're back in reality. Here we are. Okay. She didn't care. She let me then apologize to her or whatever. Anyway, at some point she's like, the chaplain, and does this. And I'm like, then I get horrified. I'm like, oh, and so then I thought you were the coroner, and we go through all of that. Bless his whole heart. I think he had a huge sigh of relief because it all kind of made sense. This was probably the weirdest way he's been treated. And this is what it also looked like. I was deferring to this like man, like I wouldn't even look at her because I'm like, I don't need to talk to you, cop. Why are you in, and anyway. Then we get into a conversation. You can edit this. I know I just ramble, but then we get into a conversation because we realize I'm like, oh, I'm a nurse practitioner. I'm like sitting by my dad on the floor, and they're sitting, we're talking. She's standing, he's sitting. And I did homeless healthcare. And she's like, oh, I'm the homeless healthcare beat. Like, I've been, I'm like, okay. And then the chaplain's like, well, I have a very good friend who's a doctor who does the mobile clinic that goes all around. I'll give him your number, but I'm like, this is so great. Look at this kumbaya moment, providing me smiles. Like, chaplain, you're doing your job. Like, yes, it's great. And it truly was. But then we launched into smells, like what it smells like for what's the dead. Because I'm curious about jobs, dead body smells, open, like burning flesh smells we get into, and homeless smell. And it was totally organic, but we all bonded over the fact that Like we had experienced these smells on our job. And then from there, because I said burning flesh and it was like too much for them, the coroner, the chaplain goes, you know who has the worst job? And we're all like, please tell us who has the worst job, chaplain. And he says, the coroners. And so I just giggle. I'm like, you know, we laugh. And he says, no, because they have to cut, you know, they have to see these bodies like that come to them with all kinds of diseases and trauma. And I'm like, hold on, sir. I'm going to go with, because I had a friend that was a homicide detective in New York City. I'm going to go with homicide detective. They show up and clearly that's a newly dead body and also can be all kinds of ways. And the police officer is like, no, nope. I'm going to go with you and the people that cut up living bodies. And then I'm like, what? We save lives with surgery? And she's like, just like my friend in the NYPD. This was a homicide detective that would show up on gruesome stuff. And he would retch if I'd be like, I took blood today. He would get so mad. He'd be like, don't. And so she reminded me, bless her heart. She's like, nope, I can't. Like, I cannot watch my blood get taken. I'm like, I'm sorry, miss. Or so you walk in and see cut up bodies and smell the smells that we all just talked about and like agreed that we have all smelled in our profession, which why are we even talking about that? And here we are with this is all very weird. And she's like, no, you all are, no, I can't. I don't know how you do it with live bodies. Like, it's just such
I mean, some people can't stand the sight of blood, especially their own. And it's just, either you can or you can't. I mean, you can either cut on somebody and, you know, it's.
Yeah, but I'm just like,
how do you cut on somebody and not feel the pain that you're doing to those people?
You use anesthesia. You use anesthesia, you don't feel it. Oh my gosh, I can't even believe. I mean, I honestly, and then so it's funny that you say that because this is now the second reaction that has been on like their team or the cops team, which is fine because I didn't even think about it this way until my brother had the exact same reaction. He got really quiet. No, not saying that you did this, but his response was the same as yours, but he just got really quiet after I told him the story. I'm like, you know, too soon? Was it not? Like, this is what really happened. And he just says, he's an attorney. He goes, I mean, it's kind of weird that they're alive when you're cutting into them. And I'm like, oh my goodness. Like, what?
I got no problem cutting on somebody. I'll tell you that right now.
So you're agreeing. So you'd rather show up at the homicide or the coroner. He's like, I mean, and I'm like, wow, you know, okay. Yeah, it was just very funny. All of it was very funny. And it's not funny because we're talking about corpse and smells and
and some, you know, sometimes a distraction will cut through the reality.
It was brilliant for me. I mean, they really read how I was and that I needed to be, you know, obviously talk about really weird, like my shock continued into very weird, bizarre conversations, asking them about their job, talking about, you know, I mean, what I just said, talking about what I just said. And they were lovely, but I don't know if they got that before. I don't know if they ever got accused of like not.
Wait till they get back to the station and tell this story, right?
So, I mean, really, right? Like they're like, so we got accused of in her head, not. I was a homicide detective and failed. He was the coroner who showed up at a natural death. Doesn't make sense and failed all of her, except it didn't. It all turned around. So
it all got worked out. So, well, let's go ahead and wrap this up. And anyway, this has been, you know, we have a conversation about death. You know, everybody's born and everybody dies. You know, that happens. And our timing, sometimes we just don't know when that timing is going to be. So, you know, my heart goes out to you with the loss of your dad. And, you know, we've had a time here where you've shared some things and I've shared some things about it. And, you know, hopefully that can comfort somebody else maybe, right?
I hope so. And I am hoping that there can be a clear understanding for people that humor and can be a part of grieving and should be. If that's something that you're naturally inclined to, it should be. And it's not something that makes you weird or awful. My brother and I have had numerous strokes since that time that are inappropriate. Same with my uncles and my cousins, and, you know, inappropriate in that sense. And it's all to provide you know, levity to a really tragic situation and a really tragic disease, which we shouldn't minimize, but also that's kind of how we've been getting through it. And so I am sorry if I've triggered anyone by talking about stuff, but I think it's really important for me to be able to talk about it. So I remember it. And also because, that was my shock.
All right, one final question before we go. Do you think you'll see him again in the afterlife?
I'm hoping. I'm so hoping. I'm gonna try to dive into that. I can't promise anything because I feel like I'm extra skeptical, now, but I hope so. What could you answer that also? Would you
Oh yeah,
tell
I think so. I think so, sir. I really think that that loved ones and people somehow are looking down on you. I don't know how that is. I don't know how to explain it, but it just seems like you know there'll be little things that happen that you'll see something and you'll say, "Oh, that reminds me of that." And my dad used to. We used to play a game when we go to my grandma's house. We called it. It was called Beaver. You could either see a white horse or a hawk, and back in the 70s, there wasn't a lot of hawks around, so it was rare because
white? You
DMT,
said a white beaver?
a white horse
Oh, horse.
or a hawk,
I thought you said
and
beaver.
that would
Why did you come up with beaver? Okay, go on.
well, that's what we'd say. You call it that. You'd say beaver, and that would
Oh,
be
okay.
that's the call sign of what it is. And it's like, so I'd see a hawk, and I think about my dad, because he would be flying free somewhere and just being the hawk, but.
That's good. I mean, truly, I love that. Now I'll think of your dad when I see that
Yeah,
because
when you see the hawk, you think of my dad, and also he was the king of the one-liners. He
I
was the
feel
king of the one-liners, and it was quiet. Unlike me, I'm more like my mom. But I have a son that never met my dad, who is almost exactly
just
like him.
like
It's
him.
unbelievable the similarities. Now
That's
the other
really
son's like me, and he's crazy. So it's
cool. It's
so
really
we
cool.
I
No,
got two sons. One reminds me of my mom, and one reminds me of my dad. So
isn't that crazy how that works out? I love that.
I
I love
never met him.
that.
Never met him.
My dad used to share animal jokes, like both when he started reading at church recently before he relapsed, and also to the kids. So like he thought he was really cool because he tried to get these very fantastic, weird animal jokes, not jokes, facts. And then
Oh,
you'd have to
animal facts.
guess. Yeah, so that's what it
Yes,
reminded me.
I got some.
Falcon jokes will all be yours now. I think
I got one animal joke for you before I go,
go.
and this is what does a deer hunter and a gold digger have in common?
I don't know what I don't
Well,
know.
they're both hunting big bucks.
Oh, that's
So there you
funny.
go. There's your deer
That's
joke.
really funny because it's actually really funny just because you say gold digger and that's funny to me, but because I'm silly and
All right. Well, hey, folks, this is going to conclude our show for today, and we hope you've enjoyed it, and hopefully, it can help some others that maybe are grieving to this time period. So, as usual, we'll be back again next Tuesday at 8 p.m. So, Cassie, what would you say? Is it like say it out loud?
say it out loud. I just to my beautiful father, he is not suffering anymore, and I'm so grateful for that. Truly, the wrap up just has to be a thank you to you because this has been really special to me. I will not forget this. Just like I told all of the homicide who was not, and also the chaplain who was not the coroner. These are the experiences that people remember right in the grieving period. You are a part of that, and this was for me really healing, uh, particularly because yeah, I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and it's not everybody will have their feelings out in the open like this. So a lot of people aren't very open on things, and I think that people can appreciate the fact that you're willing to talk about things that are very sensitive. So I think that our viewers should appreciate that. And if they don't, I'll come over and rough them up for you. So that's how's
Thanks.
that?
Thanks,
All right,
John. I mean, it
all
goes
right.
to you because you said a lot of things that I really appreciate and that you didn't have to. So thank you.
All right. Well, hey, we'll see you again next week at 8 p.m. on the Say It Out Loud show. And this is going to be on Cassie's stuff. So,
All this
Santo de Marcil, catch it and comment and all that stuff. So, we'll catch you next week. Peace and
stuff.
out.